It's not Pam's fault, it's me. Anyway, Shabbat Shalom. It's an exciting day for me today because I've got Steffi McMahon, Kaye, with us from Yad Vashem. And I met Steffi in Yad Vashem when I went on my first course, and I was the least academic of everybody there by a mile. And I was so embarrassed when I heard how many PhDs people had got. And then we were introduced to Steffi, who was the teacher of these people who had got PhDs. And some of them had got 2 PhDs. And I thought, if she's the teacher of these guys, then where does that leave me? But you know, she made me feel so welcome that actually she helped me through the course and the courses that followed and made me realize that the subject of Holocaust was not something that was intellectual, a mind thing. It was something that we had to connect with our hearts for the circumstances of the Holocaust. It had to be something a lot deeper than just something intellectual. And yet we had lectures from all sorts of great historians and theologians, Franklin H. Little, that you arranged to bring over, I think, Steffi, and Yehuda Bauer, Robert Wistridge, and many others who were really great historians, academics. And yet I loved Steffi's lessons and her seminars because they connected me with the heart of the whole subject of Holocaust. It was something that she's passionate about, she's knowledgeable about, and she brings to bear this understanding that actually God is in Holocaust because he was there. He never forsook the people who were in those gas chambers. He never left them, and it was the way that Steffi presented the whole section of Holocaust, each seminar that we had, that impacted me. So thank you, Steffi, because it did change my view of Holocaust, and I have an understanding. So I'm going to introduce her to you in a minute, but I wanted to say a few things about some of the scriptures that actually speak to us about people like Steffi, who have spent many, many years, over 20 years, teaching Holocaust. And she'll tell you a little bit about herself and a background, but she's going to talk to us about Holocaust. And I wanted to just encourage us that actually God is using people like Steffi for his plans and his purposes in these times. If we look, and I've spoken about this a number of times, but if we look at the book of Zechariah to begin with, Zechariah 1:7 speaks about this first vision that Zechariah has. And I know you've heard this a number of times, but some of you may not have done. And Zechariah has this vision where he sees a man on a red horse surrounded by myrtle trees in the deep. That's his first vision. And if you look at that vision, and look at all the 8 visions really, they're all about Israel. The myrtle trees are about Israel. The myrtle trees speak of Israel. They're a symbol of Israel. The deep, or the valley, are the nations. Oh, Zechariah is seeing God demonstrating that Israel are in the nations in this vision. But the thing is that there's a man on a red horse. And that, for me, is their Messiah, our Savior, Yeshua. The same person, God incarnate, in the middle of them. And one of the questions that is asked all the time at Yad Vashem, and Steffi would tell you this, is where was God in the Holocaust? And actually that vision actually tells us God was right there with the people. He never left them. He was there with them. And the answer is, Steffi, I think, is where was humanity? That's the answer, isn't it? Now we really need to understand what God feels about the Jewish people. He loves them. He never will leave them. He never forsakes them. He's there with them continuously. And he demonstrates that by saying later on in Zechariah 1:15, he demonstrates that by saying that although he disciplined the nation of Israel for walking away from the Torah, walking away from Sabbath, not keeping the feasts, etc., not following the Torah, what he says is that although I did that and I threw them out of the land for a time because they're going back to be restored to the land, although he did that, the nations, it says in Zechariah 1:15, added to the punishment. And that adding to the punishment was the consequences of that was the persecution from the 2nd century all the way through to Holocaust, all the way through to those 5-6 years when 6 million Jews were killed. And that's going to be the subject of tomorrow evening's memorial service. And it's wonderful that you children, Beth and Sophie and Sophia and Sarah, are going to be speaking with 2 girls from the local schools tomorrow, and Steffi. And we're going to have Izzy Owen. So please come tomorrow if you would, if you can bring family. It's really important that we get this message out. And those 5 years, or 6 years really, of Holocaust created this situation whereby ordinary men and women murdered ordinary men and women and children en masse. And the sad thing is that was a consequence of the teaching of the church. So we have to do things now to change that understanding of Israel and the Jewish people, and understand that the Jewish people are God's chosen people. And understand what God says about the Jewish people, that he doesn't forsake them. David says to Solomon in 1 Chronicles 28:20, he says, "Be strong and courageous and act, and do not be afraid or dismayed, for the Lord my God is with you. He will not fail you or forsake you." He will not fail us or forsake us. And that's the same with the nation of Israel. He was there and he stood with them, and yet there 6 million died, but their souls were in the care of God, weren't they? He cared for the souls of those people, those men and women, who many of whom didn't know him because of the way that Christians actually spoke about God and advocated for God, the way that we did that, which was appalling in so many ways. David goes on to say in Psalm 94:14 as well, he says, "For the Lord will not forsake his people, nor will he abandon their heritage." He's not going to abandon Israel, and he's not going to abandon the Jews. So what does he do after Holocaust? What's he doing now? He's actually appointing people like Steffi and others who educate about Holocaust to be a fulfillment of a prophecy that's made through Isaiah. And the prophecy is in Isaiah 41:10-13. And it's God speaking to the nation of Israel, he says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, and I will uphold you with my victorious right hand." You can see the Messiah in this, can't you? And then he says, "Yes, all who are incensed against you shall be ashamed and disgraced. Those who strive against you shall be nothing and shall perish." Now, how will God fulfill that prophecy? Well, of course he will at the end of time. When Yeshua comes back, he'll fulfill that. But how does he fulfill it between Holocaust and his return? Well, he does that by making the nations, and it says, ashamed and disgraced for what they've done. We should obviously be ashamed and disgraced for how we dealt with the Jewish people in Europe, shouldn't we? But unless you know what you've done, how do you feel shame or disgrace? The church and the European governments, historically since the Holocaust and today, up to today, are denying Holocaust, are denying their responsibility. In fact, if you look at some Christian leaders, and I'm talking about Christianity here, there are government and political leaders as well who deny Holocaust, but many Christian leaders say, "Oh, well, all we did was rescue." But there was a lot who stood by and watched it all happen. And how are we going to know about our history unless we have educators? So I think it's clear that God is appointing people like Steffi, who taught all those years in Yad Vashem, but is now released to go into the nations as a freelance, really, to go and teach about Holocaust. He's using them to remind us of what we did or what we allowed to happen during those years in the war. And to remind us, and to remind the governments of the world that they should be ashamed of what they've done. Because it is a disgrace on humanity. And that's the voice that God has in these times. It's a prophetic call that you've got, Steffi. It's a call that we would say, Yeshua. Now, that's how we see it, that Yeshua has called you to be a voice in the nations, to bring shame and disgrace that wouldn't actually be brought upon the nations unless you were here to speak about what had happened. So I'm really grateful that you're here with us and that you're going to teach us so we can go out and teach others. And I'm grateful that tomorrow night you'll be speaking to politicians and local councillors here as well as people in the community and our own community about Holocaust. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm going to, if you can come out, I'm going to just mention this book that you gave us, and then you can carry on with your presentation then, or your chat, or whatever you feel it is, and you can introduce yourself. But when I was in Yad Vashem, Steffi taught on a number of subjects, and one of the subjects was about a little boy called Tommy. And I'm going to let her tell the story because she's going to tell the story later. But she wrote something for Sam in the book, and it was dated the 18th of January 2006. And I gave the book to Sam, and I keep it. And it's actually in the Holocaust section in the library over there if you want to have a look at it. But if you can imagine that I'm a Welshman, non-academic, sitting in a lecture theatre at Yad Vashem, trying to understand what these academics are trying to tell me about Holocaust, and then this lady comes in and she starts to introduce a story about something that happened in Holocaust, and it changed my thinking about Holocaust so much that it went from there to here, and that's why I'm passionate today about this particular subject. So, Steffi, I want to thank you so much for being here and accepting our invitation to speak here to our congregation, but for the rest of the week as well. And Steffi's doing a seminar on Monday, all day Monday, from 6 until 10, I think, Monday. Is it? Yeah. And then Tuesday, Steffi's speaking to the local school and also to the homeschoolers, Elbia, isn't she, on Tuesday afternoon. And then she flies out to Ireland, where she's meeting with Stephen Cargan and Bella Kuzma and others in Northern Ireland. And she's her family are from Ireland, so we think he might come back. We're not sure, but hopefully she'll come back on Friday night, and then Saturday she'll be here again. So let's give her a round of applause. Thank you, Steffi. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here. Let me start off topic with wow. I've been a few places in my time on the planet, and I can say with tremendous gratitude that what I saw here today is true worship. So thank you for letting me be part of that. Mike was an excellent student, by the way. So good, so inspiring, that I made him the bus captain for the group. A story that he will fill you in on the details later on. So I guess what I want you to know about me to begin with is that I'm a Girl Scout. Now, I don't know if that plays in Europe the way it plays in America, but the analogy is that a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout is someone who's always prepared, always looking ahead, seeing where, the disconnects might be and being prepared for them. So I'm a Girl Scout. I want to know what I'm going to be doing, how long I have to do it, and what the topic is going to be. And Mike, who approaches me with tremendous faith, says, you'll just wing it. But I'm a Girl Scout. And truth be told, I never think that I can not only wing anything, but actually get it right. So this morning, in the quiet of this beautiful home that I'm staying in this amazing country, I began to look for inspiration and said, God, tell me, yes, there's a lot of material, but what pieces should I bring today? And the thought occurred to me that since it's Shabbat, maybe I should look at the Torah portion for today. And so I did. And the Torah portion for today has Moses saying, I'm slow of tongue and I'm thick of mouth and I'm really not the guy for this job. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, if he's not the guy for the job. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the United States, in the House of Representatives, if you go to visit there, all around the ceiling are bas-reliefs of Maimonides, of Aristotle, of Plato, of all of these great thinkers, and they all are in profile facing the front of the chamber, except for one. One of them is directly over the chair of the Speaker of the House. It faces forward, and it's Moses. The only one that looks forward. And if Moses is slow of speech and thick of mouth, what am I really going to be doing here? So I'm saying to God. And as I'm going forward and having this kind of one-sided conversation that I think I'm winning in the moment, right? Because if Moses can't do it, I certainly can't do it. I start to scroll down to see what kind of commentaries there have been about this. And a rabbi recently wrote for this page on self-doubt. Oh, okay, this was written for me. Let's see, where are we here? And of course, as I go through it, I come to a quotation from Rabbi Tarfon, who lived between 70 and 135 CE, after the destruction of the Second Temple. And he's considered one of the great sages of the Mishnah. But important for us today, or at least important for me this morning, was the fact that his great quotation is, "You are not obliged to finish the task, but neither are you free to neglect it." Okay, well, this is clearly not an argument I'm going to win today, so I might as well get busy and start figuring out what I'm going to talk about. So that quote is, of course, applicable to all of us today, but it's also applicable to Jews in the Holocaust. I'm not here as a Torah scholar. I'm here as a Holocaust educator. I'm a teacher. And if you're a good teacher, it's not just about the information that you give. It's about inspiring and challenging. So it is my prayer and my hope that today I will be a good teacher. Let me talk to you not about how Jews died, but about how they lived. And I am, of course, going to be painting with a very broad brush. The examples that I give you are examples. It's not the experience of each and every person. We come to the world, each of us as individuals, with different strengths and different capabilities, different breaking points, different gifts. So as I give you perhaps the best of a situation, please know that I'm aware of the fact that it's not the whole story. But stories is what I do. Chaim Kaplan, a teacher in Warsaw, born in the late 1800s, 40 years an elementary school teacher, is quoted in his diary as saying, "Our job, our tradition teaches us that the commandment is to live. The ancient custom of Israel is that we should live. And I suggest to you that that is what many Jews did in the Holocaust." Now, I want to take you to one ghetto. And because we're going to talk about Tommy, and because it is a place that is dear to my heart, I want to talk to you about Ghetto Terezin, often more commonly known as Theresienstadt, the model ghetto, the ghetto that the Red Cross came to. This was a place of tremendous culture, of great resistance, cultural and spiritual resistance. Not to say that the same thing wasn't going on in other places where Jews were passionate about this ancient tradition that commanded them to live. But this is a place where there was an ingathering of great cultural and spiritual leaders during the Holocaust. One of those leaders, a name that may be familiar to you, is Viktor Frankl. Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He ultimately survives the war. He becomes a psychologist. His work is very well known in a lot of areas. And one of the stories that's told about Frankl, and I'm diverging a little bit here, is after he was in Theresienstadt, he was on the ramp at Auschwitz. Frankl has, the work that we know as Man's Search for Meaning is the result of Frankl's PhD work. He appears on the ramp at Auschwitz. He has one typed copy of his PhD. Now, when I take that into classrooms, someone will raise their hand, someone much younger than I, and say, but didn't he have it backed up on his flash drive? No. He had one copy of this work that he had devoted his life to, and he had it taped to his stomach. So when he comes before the guard on the ramp, and Frankl had perfect Hochdeutsch. He was an academic. He came from Vienna, Austria. He spoke perfect German. He was a man of culture and education. And the guard says, "What's that crinkling sound?" And Frankl says, "It's my PhD." Again, all of this perfect German going back and forth. And the guard says, "Tell me about it." So he begins to explain about Man's Search for Meaning and logotherapy and all the things that he's been working on. And the guard rips it from his body, tears it to shreds, throws it on the ground, and says, "No Jew can write anything worth reading." But after the war, Frankl recreated this work that he had done. So let me quote to you from Viktor Frankl, because I think it's relevant to the things that we're talking about today. What was really needed was a fundamental change in our attitude towards life. We had to learn ourselves, and furthermore, we had to teach the despairing men that it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead think of ourselves as those who were being questioned by life, daily and hourly. Our answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and right conduct. Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. And I think life was the task that was constantly set before each individual. And I further suggest to you that if we want to see the face of God, we look to the people in our lives. We look to the people that we hear about. So please allow me to tell you about some of the people that I consider heroes. The first person I want to bring to the table is a German cantor, gotta make a nod to music, named Asher Berlinger. Berlinger and his wife are deported to Terezin, But first they managed to get their girls, their 2 daughters, out on a kinder transport. It's not entirely clear, but it may very well be one of the early attempts at rescue of Sir Nicholas Winton. Berlinger and his wife find themselves in Terezin. He's a cantor, a leader of prayer, and because of his determination to live, there is a secret synagogue in Terezin, only found in the early 90s. And along with being a cantor, Asher Berlinger is a tremendous artist. So if you have the opportunity to go and see this synagogue, he has painted on the walls where the men are coming daily to prayer, Shabbat candles, and Hebrew. And so that as these men are standing, praying the standing prayer, the Amidah, what they see before them is, "May our eyes behold your return to Zion in compassion." One might posit that that is, in fact, living. Artwork was prevalent in many of the ghettos. It was done for the purpose of eyewitness testimony, but it was also done by artists who, by extension, became teachers. One of those is Friedel Dicker Brandeis. Friedel Dicker Brandeis, a popular artist of the Bauhaus movement, is deported to Terezin, and she reasons that there'll be children there. How can she help? I think we also see the face of God in those who extend a hand, who look for ways to be of service. And Friedel Dicker Brandeis, believing that there will be children in Terezin, takes her allotment of baggage and fills it with art supplies. She comes to Terezin, she sets up art classes. And in Friedel Dicker Brandeis's class, you can be the most talented child, like someone that we'll look at tomorrow night. Or you can be someone who has problems with stick figures, like me. It didn't matter how good an artist you were. It didn't matter what you wanted to draw. You could make beautiful, happy pictures. You could make pictures that reflected the home that you had left behind. You could make really, really angry pictures. All of it was fine in Friedel's classroom. But there was one rule. You had to sign your name, because Friedel Dicker Brandeis would not allow her children to be anonymous. Ultimately, Friedel goes on a transport with some of her students to Auschwitz, where she is, of course, murdered and never returns. But because of the work of this strong, brave woman, we have between 3,500 and 4,000 pictures created by children during the Holocaust, many of whom, that's all we have. Other artists became teachers. Gideon Klein was a tremendously talented musician. He was sent on one of the first transports to Terezin, where he attempted to continue to compose, to play. He was attached to the boys' home, L417, and the boys adored him, and he adored them. And they knew how important it was for him to be able to play. And they knew that outside of Terezin, there was an old legless piano. And so the boys, under cover of darkness and a tremendous risk to themselves, snuck out of the ghetto and dragged this old piano up to the attic of the Magdeburg barracks and set it up on 3 stools so that Gideon Klein could play and, by extension, teach them. Even the guards at Terezin said, when Gideon Klein played, we stopped on the stairs to listen. It was so beautiful. He wasn't the only musician there. Raphael Schachter, a Romanian, a composer, a conductor, is again on one of these early transports. And one day he has an idea. Now, my husband, who is presently in Israel and can't dispute this, always says to me, I have an idea. And I always think, oh no. If he has an idea, I'm in for a lot of work. And so the day comes that Raphael Schachter says to people like Gideon Klein, I have an idea. Let's perform Verdi's Requiem. They get permission from the perpetrator. Now he has to talk to the Jewish council. And he goes to the Jewish council and says, I have an idea. I want to perform Verdi's Requiem. The council is up in arms. You want to perform a Catholic Mass? Did you not notice who it is that's doing this to us? Arguing back and forth, and finally he gains permission. So the Requiem will be performed in Terezin. But there's a few other hurdles we need to get past. Gideon Klein cannot run to his local Xerox machine and make up a few copies of the music, of the vocal parts. He has one copy of the Requiem. And from that copy, he teaches all of the musicians, all of the singers their parts. He has another problem. What language is the Requiem performed in? Latin, yes? Not usually the first language of the Jews. Yiddish maybe, but not Latin. So imagine the undertaking that this man has taken on, challenged by life. He has to teach all of these Jews, the singers at least, a new language and their vocal parts in that new language. And he perseveres, and the Requiem is performed multiple times, and then there's a deportation notice, and his singers, his players, his musicians, many of them are transported out. He has to find new musicians, new singers, teach new people parts. This happens several times. Ultimately, the last performance of the Requiem is for the visit of the Red Cross. That really kind of didn't look very carefully at what was going on where they were. The Red Cross is there. The Nazis, the perpetrators, they're all there. The choir, their musicians, the performance of the Requiem is down to 60 members. 3 weeks later, Raphael Schachter, along with 1,000 other Jews, takes a 3-day train ride to Auschwitz, from which he never returned. And finally, let's come to Biedrich Frita. Let's come to the Tommy book. This is one of a collection of pictures that's in this book, and I think we'll probably leave it out so that you can see it later on. Biedrich Frita was a well-known caricaturist in Prague, and he's deported with his wife and almost 3-year-old son to Terezin. He gets a job, or is sent to the German technical department, where he is working with other artists, Otto Unger, Leo Haas, many others, but those are the 3 that I want to talk to you about for a few minutes. These men, because of their job description, have access to art supplies. And so clandestinely, they're documenting the real face of the ghetto, eyewitness testimony, that someone should know what happened to the Jewish people. But Biedrich Frita has a second agenda. He wants to leave a book for his son. in which he's sharing his hopes and his dreams for his little boy on the off chance that he won't be there to share them himself. The three men are found out. The work that they've been doing is found out. And they are ultimately sent for torture. Otto Unger, after the war, survivors say, tried to continue to draw, but his hands had been so badly broken that he could barely hold a piece of charcoal. He dies in the early 50s. Diedrich Friete never comes back from Auschwitz. He dies there. His wife and young son have been sent to the small fortress with Leo Haas's wife, and it's there that Franzi Friete, Tommy's mother, passes away or is murdered. Leo Haas's wife, Erna, continues to take care of Tommy. The war ends finally, thanks God. The Holocaust is over, and Leo Haas comes back and reunites with his wife and adopts the young boy named Tommy. I want you to see just some of the pictures so that you have a sense of what it is we're talking about. They were all caricatures, things that he should know, would want to know, things that he'd be interested in and talk about, like food, packages that he gets. And I want you to take note of this one in particular because, like the first one, it has Tommy's name on it. And it has what deportation he was on and where he ultimately arrived. Diedrich Friete apparently is thinking about the fact that if he's not there and his son ever wants to know what happened to me, what happened to my mother, my father, Diedrich Friete, even in his artwork, his devotion to his young child, is giving him clues, just in case he's not there. And of course, ultimately, we know that he's not there. The end of the story is this. Leo Haas rescues Tommy. Tommy becomes Tommy Friete Haas. He reunites with his wife. Erna does not live for a long time. Again, someone who has been so badly abused during this period that her life expectancy becomes very short. But they adopt Tommy. They raise him as their own. Tommy grows up and gets married. On his wedding day, Leo Haas gives the book to Tommy, who until that day never knew it existed. A gift from a father who could not be there to take his son to the chuppah. And thank God we have that. So these are some of the people that I think for us reflect the face of God, make it easy for us to see God all around us. And so I would ask you, what did these Jews teach us? Think about it. Come to your own conclusions in the quiet of your personal reflections. But for me, my conclusions, it's not how long you live, it's how you live. Every morning as a religious Jew, I say a prayer called Modeh Ani. And the translation of it would be, thank you, God, for restoring my soul to my body. Every day is a new beginning. Every day is a new chance. The tradition teaches us a midrash, a mythical story, if you will, that when we go to sleep at night, the soul leaves the body and goes up to commune with God and comes back in the morning, which is why we thank God for returning our soul to our body. So I think that these particular Jews had a lot to teach us. it's not how long you live, it's how you live. We can beat ourselves up all the time, and I want you to know I'm really good at this, so if anybody needs lessons, about what we do or don't do, what we didn't do, what we could have done, coulda, shoulda, woulda would be the American phrase. I don't know if that plays here. But we all do it. And I think the message of the Jewish people who lived and died in the Holocaust is simply this. And I'm going to take this not just from the Jews in the Holocaust, but a very wise man told me recently, sometimes you have to close the door and move on. And sometimes that's how we define living. It's not the coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's the effort. It's the will to live. It's the commandment to live. And so I come full circle back to Rabbi Tarfon. You are not obligated to finish the task, but neither are you free to neglect it. The Jews that I have brought to this room today knew that. They understood it very clearly. And now it's our turn. Thank you very much.
Don't go, Steffi. Steffi is retired from her lecturing at Yad Vashem. And it's a hard thing to do that. It's really difficult when you've been involved in something that your heart is in for so many years. And we all have to retire at some stage, don't we, from whatever we're doing in an organization. But actually, we can't retire from the things that God has asked us to do. And I've been praying for you a lot and asking God to just show me what He would have you do. And it came in that scripture in Isaiah, where God is asking a voice to be heard, particularly in the nations regarding Holocaust, so that the nations will understand the consequences of what we've done to the Jewish people. And I really feel that you are such a wonderful voice. And everybody has heard you today, and I haven't finished with you yet after that. To heard you today, but would you agree that she speaks from the heart and connects us with the heart? And it's beyond the intellectual, because the intellectual causes us often to forget, because it's part of the brain. But you never forget things of the heart, do you? And things that you teach will stay with us. They've stayed with me all these years. So what I'm going to ask you, Steffi, is this. There are lots of aspects of Holocaust, ranging from arts, music, as you say. There was resistance in the ghettos, resistance in the camps. There was resistance, actually, in the killing fields as well. And there were stories in the killing fields of brutality, but there were stories of where mothers held on to children, children held on to mothers, and fathers desperately tried to hide the horrors from their families. Now, with all the aspects of Holocaust that you've studied and you know about, and whether it's art or whether it's whatever, what is the most important to you?
You see how he managed to make me speak spontaneously, whether I wanted to or not?
She's got such knowledge, guys. She doesn't even know.
What is the most important to me? Well, it's something that comes out of the Yad Vashem educational philosophy, and it's the face of the individual. I can talk to you about 6 million. Do you have any idea what 6 million anything is? I don't. I mean, I'm willing to win the lottery and find out what 6 million is, but until that happens, it's a number. It's impersonal. It's disconnected. It's only when we bring the story down to the face of one person, to Gideon Klein, to Raphael Schachter, to Friedel Dicker Brandeis, to survivors I know and that Mike knows that have now passed on or are close probably to those days. It's only when we connect ourselves to someone's individual story, in and out of the Holocaust, that there's a real connection there. So my husband is a historian, and I'm not. So he is very much the figures, the facts, the dates, the this, the that. And it is certainly integral to what we do in terms of educating ourselves. We have to know the history. And you can do very nicely knowing about the Holocaust without knowing anything but the history. But you'll have to forgive the literature person who believes that that is a body that's a skeleton without a heart, without skin, without muscle, without anything else. He's going to kill me when he sees this. And the face of the individual. Whether your passion as an individual is music or theology or art or literature, that's a door to go in and meet people and connect to them. So that would be my answer. That's what's most important, to address the face of the individual. What else have you got, Mike?
Okay, this is easy for you, though. Going with that theme, you introduced me to Ruth Brand,
Yes.
who was an amazing survivor and an amazing woman. And you told me last night she's died now.
Yeah.
And you introduced me to Ella Shiva, who was a friend of Anne Frank's. Can you just tell us about those two people? Because they're dear to me, and they were really beautiful people and beautiful survivors. But Steffi, they really loved Steffi. They had a lot of love for her and a lot of respect for her. And you encouraged them to teach people like me, didn't you, to come along and show us? So can you tell us about them?
They were motivated.
Yeah. Can you tell us about them?
So Elisha Lerman is still with us. She's not in great health and she's a little confused. But the story that she used to tell, her personal testimony at Yad Vashem, was about being hidden. She and her family members were hidden in Holland. And it was a young pastor and his wife, the Quakers, who hid this family. I think altogether there were finally 6 Jews being hid by the Quakers. And the daily routine of the hiding, and please keep in mind that whoever is hiding a Jewish person is putting their life in jeopardy as well as any family members. So the daily routine was that they were sitting still and silent during the day, but in the evening the Quakers would bring them up to the main part of the house where they could, stretch their legs and relax a little bit. And on Christmas Eve, Pastor Quaker comes down and says, "My children," because Elisheva says he always called us his children. "My children, would you forgive me tonight if we didn't invite you up? It's Christmas Eve. My wife is very pregnant, and we'd love just to have some quiet, prayerful time on Christmas Eve, just to be by ourselves. Would you forgive us?" And Elisheva says, we were terribly disappointed, but of course we all forgave them. I mean, they're putting their lives at risk for us. And so they're sitting there rather despondent, and time goes by, and then Pastor Quaker comes down and says, "My children, come upstairs, we're ready now." And they have no understanding of what has happened here, but husband and wife have made a cake that has a Christmas wreath in red and green around it and a menorah in the middle. And Mrs. Quaker is playing on the organ in the living room, and they had a Christmas Hanukkah celebration. Elisheva grew up to be a kindergarten/music teacher. So the last time I saw her was in 2018 when we brought her to a conference. And as I said, she's, it's been a long time. First of all, she hasn't seen me in a really long time. She kept looking at me and smiling, but I was never really sure if she was smiling because she because that's all she does is smile. She grins from ear to ear, or whether or not she really recognized me. But her son brought her accordion from all those many years ago, and Elisheva played for the people in the room. Ruth Brand is a different story. Ruth Brand is from Hungary or Romania, depending on where we are on the chronological timeline. Ruth is 16 years old. When I came to Yad Vashem, I was newly back at the university, finishing a degree. And the benefactors decided that they would send me to Yad Vashem with the vice president of the university. Okay. So much like Mike, I'm sitting with all of these academics and PhDs, and I have decided that I'm going to be very appropriate and very professional and very cerebral about this whole experience. My original seminar was 24 days long. And I made it through to, I think it was day 21 when Ruth Brand spoke. And she gave her testimony about going to Auschwitz, this young 16-year-old girl. And she gets to the part in the testimony where she says, you know, my mother went to this side and I went to that side, my mother and my grandmother, and I ran over to be with them, and the Nazi guard pulled me back. This happens 3 or 4 times, and finally, the mother, the grandmother, they go in one direction, Ruth goes in another direction. And as she gives her testimony, she says, when we got to the barracks, we asked the girls, when are we going to see our family members? And these, you know, Polish girls who had been there for sometimes 6 years already, very sarcastically said, oh, you want to see your family? They're up there, pointing to the chimneys. And Ruth says, that night, my entire family went to the ovens and ultimately to the crematoria. It was May the 18th, 1944. Now, lest you think otherwise, I was not born in 1944, but I was born on May the 18th. And my youngest living child was born on May the 18th. And there I sat, turning into a puddle, because I'm looking at this woman and I cannot believe that on the day the most precious thing in my life came into the world is the same month and day that Ruth Brand lost her entire family. And so I sat there, you know, like the local waterworks and just cried and cried and cried. My personal story goes forward so that I wind up in Israel and I have access to Ruth Brand. And I tell her, you know, I just want you to know that when you spoke and I was sobbing and sobbing, that's why I was sobbing. For all the years of her life, up until about 3 years ago, when, as a result of a series of small strokes that ultimately became a bigger one, and she wound up with aphasia and the inability to do much of anything. But for all of the years prior to that, wherever I was in the world, and more times than not, I was in America, Ruth is in Israel, she would call me on May the 18th to wish me a happy birthday. And so she is certainly one of my heroes. Absolutely, positively. What else you got, Mike?
One more thing. Can you turn the camera off, please, Pam? Because I'm going to ask if